being led by God into temptation. Matthew chapter 4 and verse 1 is where this starts. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. This scripture right here is enough to wreck some shallow theology. Jesus was led by the Spirit. Jesus, full of the Spirit, fresh out of baptism. Jesus had just been affirmed by the Father, and he's led into temptation. And I've had moments in my life, you've probably been there too, where temptation feels almost like it's a punishment. Like temptation felt like I was in trouble. I wonder what Jesus felt. He'd just fasted for 40 days, and I wonder what he felt going into the wilderness. Because if temptation makes you a failure, then the Spirit would have led Jesus into failure. But temptation it's a forming, right? Being tempted is not, it's not that we're weak. It's just a part of our human experience. And so when God leads you into temptation, he's revealing to you what you're bent towards. And what's interesting is in the wilderness, he's not in with the crowds. He's not even in with his disciples here. There's no applause for Jesus. He's on his own. He's by himself. So you actually hear what speaks the loudest. That isolation reveals to you, the wilderness reveals to you what the loud hides, what the applause, if you will, hides. And so in verse number 2, this is where the first temptation happens. It says, after fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry, being Jesus. And verse 3 says, the tempter came to him and said, if you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread. And at first glance, I think it's about hunger. But the reality here is, if you are the Son of God, then fix this. Fix your hunger. Self-soothe. Your relief, your urge to escape the discomfort, right? And Jesus is legitimately hungry. It's not that he's not hungry. It's not that he's hungry here. He hasn't had anything to eat, and he's led away. And so the temptation is not the sin, because one scripture says to be tempted, you're drawn away with something you're bent towards and enticed. So you can't entice me if I don't want it. So both come into play, and this is where Jesus is at. He's hungry, and he's offered something to relieve that hunger. And it's interesting because Satan's voice here sounds reasonable, right? Why suffer if you don't have to? Yes. And Jesus refuses to let his appetite be the authority here. Verse 4 says, Jesus answered, "It is written," he says, "man shall not live by bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." Man shall not live on bread alone, but every word that comes from the mouth of God. Here's something that feels urgent, but he doesn't give authority to it. If it felt urgent in the moment, it doesn't mean it has to have the authority. Right? Some things help us survive, but they don't help us become who God has called us to be. Temptation here, it's temporary for him, but it's the surrender that's sustainable. It's the surrender that's sustainable. And then we see temptation number 2. So Jesus doesn't, he's locked in. He doesn't move. So it's okay, let's move this needle and let's see if we can help him a little bit. Like let's see what this temptation does. And verse 5, he says, "Then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand up on the highest point of the temple. And he says, 'If you are the Son of God,'" and here he goes again. And now it's a matter of proving yourself. "If you are the Son of God," he says in verse 6, he says, "Throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift up their hands so that you will not strike your foot against the stone." And this is interesting because Satan quotes Scripture. He hits him with his own word. This is spiritual manipulation on full display. I'm going to manipulate it to fit this narrative. You've got to prove yourself. And here it's interesting to me because I see performance here. I see make God show up for you. Make him show up. I see here, make your faith loud so everyone can see that you really are who you say you are. As if the miracles aren't enough. But Jesus refuses to turn his intimate encounters with the Father, his solo moments with the Father, into a public display. And it reminds me of Matthew 6 when he says, and I see so much of it. Sometimes I'll talk to someone or things that I've experienced over the years, and it makes me wonder, what is it? Matthew 6, he says, when you pray, go into your closet. And you don't have to shout it to the world. In fact, don't. He says, just let it be you and him. And then he goes on and he says the same thing about fasting. And he says, if you're going to push the plate away, don't shout it from the mountaintops. Don't make it. He says, wash your face. Make it look as though you're not. Well, that doesn't even seem right, because I'd want people to know that I'm fasting, and the whole thing is here, do it in secret. Because when you do it in secret, that's how I know you're really doing it for me and not for You're not proving yourself. You're not showing off. You're doing it for me. And so verse 7, Jesus answers him and says, it is also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test. And I find this interesting because it's like the spiritual manipulation comes out, and then there's a scripture. So there's scripture, and then there's scripture. And I realize you can interpret it in a wild way to fit your narrative if that's what you want. And the thing is, what I love about Jesus, he doesn't defend here. He just, don't test me. He just drops it. Don't test me. Shame doesn't say you're bad. Shame says you need to prove you're good. Let me say that again. Shame doesn't just say you're bad. Shame says you need to prove you're good. Now, if you have to prove it, I wonder, do you really believe it? If it's got to be proven, is it really a belief? Can you heal identity wounds by performing? And so I see this earlier in Scripture, and I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but the need to prove, and Jesus just drops it out. Just, I don't have to prove anything. There's no test here. I am who I am. It is what it is. Verse 8 goes on, and here's the next one. Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. And he says, all of this I will give you if you will bow down and worship me. And this is interesting because it's as though he needs to control it. Here's the high mountain. Here's all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. As if you're not talking to the creator of the universe. All of this I will give to you. He says, if you will bow down and worship me. Control without surrender. Outcome without process. Just an instant gratification. It's the pull of comparison. This is the creator of the universe. This isn't, what are we? And Jesus doesn't even argue. He doesn't negotiate. He just ends the conversation. And he just says in verse 10, Jesus says unto him, away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. And why does he do this? So he's tempted to worship by Satan, to worship Satan. It is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. And authority shows up when his identity is settled. And I was talking to someone yesterday, and I said, really your authority comes from your experience. And I see this in Jesus. His authority come from where he had been. Because he's been in the garden. He's been alone with Jesus. And so guess what? He has the authority. His experience has given him that authority, and his identity is settled in it. Because patterns lose power when you stop negotiating with them. And there's patterns in Jesus' life that give him that identity, that give him that strength, and the negotiation is over. And then verse 11 says, then the devil left him, and angels came and attended him. So notice this order. Jesus doesn't get strengthened before the confrontation. It's almost as though sometimes life happens and it would be much easier, and you have a reserve, and maybe you've spent time with Jesus and you have that charge to move forward, but I notice here that Jesus gets strengthened after he was confronted with it all, not before. And surrendering didn't remove his hunger. He still was hungry. Temptation reveals what rules when you're depleted. When there's nothing else, and you're at your loneliest time, most vulnerable time, if you will, it's just revealing something in you where you're really at. And I see this pattern. We go back to Genesis 3, and here's the serpent. It's the snake, and he's in the tree, and he says, God says, of all these trees you can eat, but he tells Adam and Eve this, but just don't eat that one. And Eve's out and about one day, and she comes to the tree, and we see the serpent who disguises himself in this he tells Eve the fruit was good for food. And it's the same temptation here as in Matthew 4. The fruit was good for food because she needed relief. She was hungry. Lust of the eyes, pressing pleasing to the eye. It was pleasing to the eye, which John writes, there's three temptations: the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eye, and the pride of life. And right here we see it's pleasing to the eye. You see the comparison here. What you're working for isn't enough. This is better. Right? And then the next one is it's desirable for wisdom. It's going to make you wise. And you see the pride of life and proving your worth. And if you can be wise, then you're worth something. And it's like, well, Eve, you're already worth something. And you see the same thing in here. And with Jesus, Satan doesn't try something new on him. It's the same familiar thing. Turn the stones into bread. Relieve your hunger. All the kingdoms I'll give you, right? Oh, it's pleasing to the eye. Yeah, it looks, yeah. And then throw yourself down. Prove who you are by doing this. Yeah. You don't have to prove yourself. You did. And here's the difference is Eve, I see, reached. But Jesus resisted. It's the same temptation, but it's a different kind of surrender. Eve do you know your worth? You don't have to prove it. Eve, do you know the hunger? You don't have to look for the relief. There's something else that's more sustainable. Eve, do you know that you are enough? You don't have to be compared to anybody else or anything else. John names all these as categories: the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eye, the pride of life. But the temptation doesn't show up as categories. It shows up as pressure on the heart. I used to hear people talk about sin. You know, they'd say, you know, maybe this sin, or insinuate that this sin was worse than this sin, which was worse than this sin, and there was kind of layers, or, you know, there was kind of. But John just puts them in three categories, and we see this twice. By 2 or 3 witnesses, let every word be established, right? And so we see 3 different things here. It's categories of lust. In Matthew chapter 4 and verse 4 says, going back to where we were at earlier, he says, man, Jesus answered, it is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but every word. It's not about willpower. It's about awareness. It's not bread alone. You can get bread, but the real bread that we seek that's sustainable is the word that comes from God. That's sustainability. That's you and you don't overcome temptation by fighting harder. Jesus doesn't fight harder in this. He actually surrenders deeper. Every single thing he says, he just lets go on a deeper level. And I would submit to you today the question, who are you under pressure? When the pressure's high, who are you? Because who we are isn't revealed in the good times. Who we are is revealed when it gets tough, when it is a struggle, when there is temptation. Who we are under pressure. It's not just about resisting the bad things. It's about who we listen to when we're empty, when we're alone, when we're unprotected. And I would also submit that temptation isn't about behavior first. It's about where you're looking for life. Because our flesh says, feel better. Our eyes say, have more. Our pride says, be your own God. And surrender actually says, not my will, but yours be done. Shortcut. Temptation always offers a shortcut to something that God's promised. It's just without trust. But walking with God isn't a shortcut. Walking with God is a journey. You're constantly finding who He's created you to be. You're constantly discovering what's in you. You're constantly learning about yourself. You're constantly seeing who you really are. It's that awareness. Can we surrender the temptation?